But we'll get started. So my name is David Spinks. I'm the CEO of CMX. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. We're really excited to be able to bring lots of different experts to the community industry, to the CMX community. And we have a really exciting guest for you today. Bill Johnston is the founder of Structure 3C. Bill and I have known each other for quite some time now, probably coming up on like 7 or 8 years. Both have been in the community industry for a long time, but I was learning from Bill when I first got started and I had no idea what I was doing. Bill was already super active in the space, ran community for Autodesk, built the Ideas Exchange community at Dell, has been working on this stuff for a really long time, and now he runs this firm, Structure 3C. They focus on designing modern communities, working with Salesforce, IBM, Intuit, AARP. So lots of amazing clients, and he's basically my go-to expert for anything related to innovation communities, anything that deals with collecting ideas and feedback from your community members, improving your product alongside your community. So he's always been like my go-to for that topic, and really excited to be able to bring this workshop here today. Before we dive into what the workshop's going to go into, Bill, you want to just say hi real quick and anything I missed there?
No, just thrilled to be here, David, and really thrilled to be connecting with the CMX network. And I love the events. I love the vibrancy of the community of community professionals that have kind of come together around the CMX banner. So just really stoked to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. Very excited. I got to see this workshop in person a few weeks ago in San Francisco for a small group, and I thought it was just like incredibly helpful for mapping out what you can do with your own innovation community. So I asked Bill to come and join us. So we're going to dive in here in a sec. Quick couple announcements on the CMX front. CMX Summit, it's our big conference, happens once a year. And it's going to be October 2nd and 3rd in Portland this year. And there's only 4 days left to get early bird tickets. So if you're thinking about coming and you haven't gotten your early bird tickets yet, make sure to get those now. You go to cmxhub.com/summit. And if you're not familiar with CMX and you just stumbled on this webinar, we're an association for community professionals. And so we provide training, webinars like this, events. Our mission is to help community professionals thrive. So everything we do is to give you the resources and connections and support you need to be successful. So if you want to learn anything else about CMX, you go to cmxhub.com and you can become a member at cmxhub.com/pro. That's the only sales pitch you'll hear from me today. We're going to start kicking it off with the webinar and the presentation now. And so, like I said, I saw this presentation that Bill provided a few weeks ago, and this is a long workshop that Bill always does with his enterprise clients. So this can go for a day, it could go for 2 days. Planning out a full innovation community strategy is a pretty in-depth topic, and you can go really deep into it. And what Bill's done is actually condense that workshop into the 40 minutes or so that we have today. He'll talk through it more, but we're going to have an opportunity he'll go through those slides. If you didn't see your email, make sure to check your email because we sent out the worksheet for this workshop yesterday, which you can download for free from the email, and everyone will be able to download the worksheet and fill it out during this webinar. And then we're going to open up at the end for any questions. So if you're watching live in the webinar, you can just use the Q&A functionality here in Zoom. We're also watching the Facebook live stream in the group, so you can comment with your questions there. We'll field them for Bill to be able to answer some of your questions at the end. All right, so with that, let's dive in. I'm going to share one thing real quick here before I hand it off to Bill. So if you could see my slides here. So we published a study last year looking at how businesses are investing into community and where they get value. And I just thought this was one really interesting data point to set the scene. On the blue, you see the percentage of companies that switched to this business value. And the orange is percentage of companies who always had this business value. And so what we found in this study was the most popular version or the most popular value that businesses are investing in the community is for customer support or success. But by far, the one that they're switching to the most is product ideation, innovation, and feedback. And so it was just interesting to see a lot of companies start in the support realm or start in the marketing and acquisition realm, but they end up switching to ideation and innovation. That's the most common community program to switch, and most companies end up switching at some point. And it's because they start these communities and they end up seeing all the interesting feedback and insights that's coming from the community, and they start to see that there's extreme value in collecting insights from your community and using that to drive where your product is going. And it clearly directly impacts your company and your product. And so this is something that if you're not currently building an innovation community, it's something that you might consider. It's a good chance, according to our data, that you will consider it in the future. So whether you're currently building one or you're thinking about doing it in the future, hopefully this is a helpful guide for you to get started. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bill so you can take it away.
All right, thank you, David. And everyone, bear with me just a second as I get this screen sharing figured out. And keep bearing with me. It looks like Chrome has crashed.
Oh, great.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay. Thank goodness. All right. So that sometimes, depending on the webinar and the circumstances, that could take up to 10 or 15 minutes, but we knocked it out in a minute. So very cool. And by the way, David, I hadn't seen that that slide and that data before. So that's really fantastic and encouraging, because one of my sort of core beliefs and potentially more obnoxious assertions is I feel like in general, parts of the industry are still very much focused on break-fix support forums as either a primary business activity or as a primary aesthetic for their community engagement. And bottom line for me, it's kind of time to move on. So I appreciate that data. Just to reinforce the fact that if you don't have the worksheet, the last 5 to 10 minutes of this session are not going to make a whole lot of sense. So if you still haven't downloaded it, one last nudge, you can go to bit.ly/CICwork and get the worksheet. All right, so let's get rolling. As David mentioned, I've been fortunate to have been working on essentially large, mostly enterprise-oriented communities for most of my career. I got my big break, if you will, with Tech Republic back in the late 90s, and have had senior positions at Autodesk and Dell building customer communities, and then took a little bit of a break to do some independent consulting and research and event development back in the late 2000s, and also did some initial work around benchmarking community manager salary and community ROI. So the reason I show you this slide, aside from the fact that I am really sort of fixated on the circle diagram, is that I've mostly been on the brand side. So I've mostly, for my career, been on the side of the practitioner versus consultant. And so I just wanted to sort of set the stage and let everyone know where I'm coming from. So the workshop in our flow, if you will. So as David mentioned, this is a mix of a workshop that I normally run, and it can be extended to a day, up to 2 days for really large community planning sessions. But the flow for today, our next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to start with a bit of market context. I'll go into how innovation and communities relate, how they should relate, frankly, the evolution of innovation communities, examples of brand and project-based communities, and then we'll get into the planning worksheet, and we'll end with some Q&A. So I hope that sounds like a good way to spend the next 40 minutes or so. So, I started with the somewhat potentially obnoxious assertion. I'll roll out a few more here. I feel like we're having another breakthrough moment for community building, but there are a few caveats. So in my career, I've seen ebbs and flows of interest and investment in online communities and related related activities. And I feel like we're right in the middle of another one of those surges. But there are a few call outs here. So markets in general have never exerted greater pressure on organizations to perform and adapt to customer need. We're in this really interesting position where social media networks have, especially from the brand side, have not delivered the value that maybe was promised 5 to 7 years ago. And so, I'd like to say most brands are experiencing a bit of a social media hangover. And there's the shift from the sort of me perspective in social media to more of a we perspective generally. I would say customers are hungry for more meaningful connections with certain brands, but they expect more of a mobile-like ease of use for customer experiences generally and communities specifically. And that, as community builders, we're really blessed with a lot of choice and platforms and technologies and interfaces to work with. And, by the way, half the global population has internet access at this point. So there, are lots of people. Clay Shirky wrote a book a few years ago called Here Comes Everybody. I would say most everybody's here now. And, historically undervalued communities and related metaphors, if you will, like networks and ecosystems, I would say are really critical for business growth, innovation, and resilience. And I hope to back up most, if not all of those points in the next few slides. So to the point of companies facing intense pressure to innovate. The chart that you see on the left is a report that a company named Innovate publishes every 4 to 5 years, tracking the turnover in the S&P 500, which of course is the stock market index. And what they've seen is the increasing velocity of companies falling out of that index. So the companies are falling out because of a few reasons. One, and sort of most drastically, they just cease to exist. 2, they're acquired, or 3, they stop performing to the degree that they need to qualify for the index. So we're seeing this, what Innovate terms creative destruction in the S&P 500, and the pace of that creative destruction is accelerating. Another recent report that I thought was really interesting is from CB Insights, and the reports the state of innovation. By the way, both of these reports are freely available, and there are links to them obviously in the slides, which I'll share after the session. But the other call out is that 41% of executives surveyed out of the approximately 700 strategy executives said that they felt like their companies were at risk of disruption. So either extremely at risk or very at risk. So almost close to half executives on the strategy side feel like they're at risk and need to innovate. So an interesting counterpoint to the S&P 500 slide or chart from just a few moments ago. In 2014, a study by Deloitte looked at almost that exact same data set, and what they were trying to do was to understand what the critical factors were in the performance or lack of performance in the S&P 500. So what they did is they went in, they looked at 40 years of S&P data, and they sort of extrapolated out 4 different types of business models within the S&P 500. And I won't go into the gory details here, but the one model that seemed to correlate with resilience and performance was this model of network orchestrators. So these were companies that either were essentially networks or communities in and of themselves, or were heavily dependent on some type of technology and human network. And so what they found was net-net, networked companies create more value than their peers that are not in that class. And then another point, connected customers, I would assert, are more valuable in general than non-connected customers. And what I've seen in my professional practice on the brand side, both at Autodesk and Dell, is they're typically more loyal, they're typically better advocates, they typically spend more, they spend more often, and they have the ability, and that's why we're here today, to co-create products and services with you. So I'll talk about IdeaStorm a little later in the session today, but just one call out here. When we were going through a pretty significant redesign of IdeaStorm, one of the things that I wanted to do when I was at Dell was to really understand the value that IdeaStorm was creating for the company. And so we were able to isolate 5 products in the Dell lineup that we could say with a high degree of certainty were solely sourced from IdeaStorm. So basically, if IdeaStorm didn't exist, neither would these products. And we wanted to track the market impact of those products to essentially establish a benchmark of value. And what we saw was, just for those 5 products, they had a global financial impact in the hundreds of millions of dollars. We also studied the behavior of IdeaStorm members. So these were community members that were either contributing ideas, helping to refine ideas, or voting ideas up or down. And revenue from IdeaStorm members was 50% higher than non-members. The purchase frequency was 33% higher. They had a higher lifetime value. And this was the kicker, because I wanted sort of that one, you know, if I was trapped in an elevator with an executive, I wanted that one sort of soundbite stat. And so I was able to say with a high degree of certainty that the average value of an idea on IdeaStorm was $10,000, which was essentially the market impact of the 5 ideas that we essentially qualified, divided by the number of ideas contributed on the site. So obviously some ideas are better than others, but we could say with a straight face that the average value of an idea was $10,000. So looking at you know, different types of innovation communities and thinking about and studying this for the last few years, I have proposed this simple framework to sort of categorize innovation communities. And it's, you know, you're looking at the same slide that I am. I think it's fairly straightforward and simple. There are brand hosted innovation communities, there are project-based innovation communities, and there are these sort of larger entities called grand challenges. So what are these things? So brand hosted is typically an open innovation platform that, or an innovation platform that's hosted by the brand. A lot of times it's hosted on the existing community platform. So most community platforms, so I'm thinking of things like Lithium now, I'm thinking of things like the Salesforce Community Cloud, have some type of ideas modules, right? So brand hosted communities are essentially, you know, the ideas function either bolted onto an existing community or a standalone community that's closely associated. There are instances where this is not the case, and there are more robust programs, and I'll talk about sort of the evolution of this in just a second, but a couple of call outs for brand hosted communities that I think that are done really well, or comprehensive programs that are done really well, are First Build by GE and the Henry Initiative by Nestle seems to be a really robust and mature. So moving on from brand hosted to project-based communities, you can think of this as a community of expertise that solves specific project challenges. So examples here would be Yovoto, HeroX, which is a sort of more commercialized version of the X Prize, more or less, and OpenIDEO. And so project-based communities, essentially brands go in and sponsor specific projects. They're very project-focused and outcome-driven. They're definitely on an external community platform, which would be, you know, the host, Yovoto, HeroX, OpenIDEO, and it's essentially on-demand community participation and expertise. And then there are these larger grand challenge initiatives, which, you know, frankly stretch the concept of community, you know, to a large degree. But I think they do bring together sort of disparate communities to solve really big, gnarly global challenges. And so, you know, we'll focus today more on the brand hosted and project-based side of things, but I thought it was important to sort of put a bookend on the other side of the spectrum, if you will, and thus the grand challenge hexagon is there. So, you know, flipping those community types on their head, just to look at more of a traditional model for innovation, if you will, the intent here is really just to show that community and online communities, as we think about them, can actually play a meaningful role in most any type of innovation program, whether it be breakthrough innovation, which are like net new business models and net new products, to more sustaining innovation, which is essentially, evolving a product to, nurture it through a logical life cycle, to disruptive innovation, which is if the students of Christensen here may argue with my definition, but it's essentially when companies create products, services, or business models intended to disrupt their existing products, services, and business models. And then basic research, which is really just, I think at the end of the day, getting a better understanding of a market dynamics, or customer needs. So, for me, community can play a role, and we have examples of community playing a role in all these types and categories of innovation. So the next few slides, I'll walk through some examples of brand-based innovation communities, and two of them I've actually built, and then we'll go into the project-based innovation communities. And then we'll tie all of that up with a bow, and then talk about how you would actually move forward in planning a pilot for your own innovation community. But first, digging into brand-based innovation communities. One thing that I've noticed, again, in my practice is, essentially this inferred maturity model for innovation communities. And the reason I'm sharing this is I want to help everyone avoid the mistakes that I've made and the hard lessons won in doing this. So typically, when a brand starts out with an innovation community, they do the equivalent of a social suggestion box. So they'll roll out their ideas platform. They'll take any type of idea that anyone feels free to suggest, and they quickly just get sort of a deluge of varying degrees of quality of ideas, well-formed ideas. It's really all over the board, and it's really a mess. And I've seen this approach sink many initiatives, because you quickly find that there's just no way that staff can process these in any sort of timely fashion, and the strategy of doing it actually becomes called into question. So the first stop, which is really kind of in a way the first mistake I've seen folks make, including Dell, is this sort of open call for ideas, taking on all comers. This quickly moves into, as I sort of alluded to a second ago, overwhelming backlog, which is you have hundreds, thousands, potentially tens of thousands of ideas to process and acknowledge, to get feedback from the product team, to figure out how you're going to staff, managing this information, shoveling it back and forth, how you align, the really good ideas with product roadmaps. You quickly sort of get stuck in information overwhelm and essentially needing to evolve your process on the fly. And then this will inevitably lead to a more methodical approach, which typically results in more of a managed sprint for ideas. And honestly, I think this is where most organizations should start today, which is in this sort of step 3. And the real trick here is to be very clear on scope. So signaling to your community the topics that you want to hear about and that you have a high degree of ability and readiness to act on, that you're very crisp and clear with schedules. So how long you're taking feedback, setting expectations on how quickly you can turn around feedback on ideas presented, and then getting a very robust team in place to act on processing ideas, and usually doing a second round where you're forming the ideas you're merging ideas and forming ideas into more of a well-formed roadmap or action plan. So managed sprints is really where I would encourage folks to start, if at all possible. And then getting into more of this collaborative innovation space where, and this is aspirational for most companies or companies that roll out more of a comprehensive plan, sometimes have a hard time sustaining it. But there's a very clear methodology. There are clearly, defined processes. There are aligned teams across the organization that all meaningful functions within the business are participating, and that the active innovation is embedded into the community ecosystem in a meaningful and contextual way, meaning it may not make sense to only have a destination ideation community. It may make sense to have the destination and then satellite interfaces in partner communities, as a for instance, or it may make sense to distribute idea solicitation interfaces and/or voting and feedback interfaces, via your social channels. So, it really is more of an ecosystem approach as opposed to forcing folks into a specific destination. And as we'll see in the upcoming examples, this may also mean an in-person presence. So I'll go through these examples fairly quickly. Dell's IdeaStorm was a project that I worked on. It was initially launched in 2007, and they quickly went from social suggestion box to overwhelming backlog, which is, where I came in. So I got to feel the pain of that and to help reboot the IdeaStorm program. This actually happened so before I knew I was in charge of it. I got a call from my VP one Saturday telling me to clear my calendar because apparently someone had posted an idea on the older version of IdeaStorm that if Dell wasn't going to participate in IdeaStorm, they should just shut it down. It just so happened that Michael Dell saw that particular idea, didn't like it very much, and so the responsibility rolled downhill to me, and I was told to go fix it. As an aside, I wound up hiring the person who posted that original idea to either fix it or shut it down. I wound up hiring that person, who is Cy Jervis, as my community manager for IdeaStorm. So it was a very, very magical period for IdeaStorm, the 2 to 3 years after that sort of call out, reboot, and refactoring of interface, of programs, and community management responsibilities. One thing that we had to get really tight on, and I won't do a ton of process slides, but I did want to call out this one. One of the things that we got really tight on was how ideas were processed, because the longer you wait to acknowledge and respond to ideas, the motivation for the community to actually continue to participate goes down sharply. And that sounds pretty obvious, but in practice, it's amazing, how often it's not supported with staff. So what we wound up doing was actually creating this role called Idea Partner, which was essentially a hybrid community manager and product manager whose job by product board was to facilitate the essentially grading, feedback, and in some cases implementation of the idea between the community, so acting as comms and a program manager between the community and the product team. And this actually worked really well, and we wound up actually swiping this from Starbucks and my Starbucks idea. So I think another nudge from me would be, don't hesitate to make friends with other community staffers in your industry doing similar programs, because a cohort of 3 to 4 people at different companies sharing best practices, and in some cases, if you can get away with it, analytics, program data, et cetera, that can be a very powerful means of support for you in your career. A few other examples of brand-based innovation programs that are really, have community as our core. So Otter PR9 is essentially the most amazing makerspace you will ever see, right? It's on the Pier 9, as it turns out, in San Francisco. It's where Instructables, which is an Autodesk DIY community, is housed, and it's open for tours. They also have an artist in residence program where makers actually come in. They have a pass to use the space for a few months, and it's really this beautiful intersection of in-person community connected with the actual, Autodesk online communities. Another call out, and again, sorry for all the makerspace examples, but I'm really into this, and it's a personal passion of mine. GE First Build, which is this, I'd say it's probably the second most amazing makerspace. No offense to the First Build folks, in Louisville, Kentucky, my hometown. And this is truly amazing because with some minor caveats, anyone in the community can come in and work in the makerspace. There's some machines or tools that you need to get training for to use beforehand, but anyone can come into the makerspace, and the real in-person community around First Build in Louisville is complemented by a global online community at firstbuild.com, where they regularly have challenges, to create or evolve products, and you can also propose your own ideas. This is all owned by GE Appliances, so the focus of the community is really around appliance hacking and IoT and smart home, but really an amazing space and an amazing community. I would encourage you to go check both of them out. And then sort of a last, potentially a little bit of a side trip on internal communities and techniques for spurring community discussion. Two call outs here. Two great examples of internal innovation programs are Adobe Kickbox and Intuit Innovation Catalyst. So both of these programs are designed to essentially empower extended employees, and in some cases, external parties, to understand and activate on that company's particular innovation methodology. So it's really fantastic. And I'm just noticing that the text box on the bottom is not the right slide, so apologies for that. I'll include the final links in the final presentation that was posted. But both of these examples are accessible. You can download both kits now. I would encourage you to check them out. And then the unconference methodology, which is based upon open space technology, is a really fantastic way to bring together people within an organization to deep dive on a particular topic that needs attention and needs a shot in the arm from an innovation perspective. So we actually started unconferences at Dell to help roll out training and to develop ideation around Dell's social presence as a complement to our social media training. And these were held all over the world in the first 2 years that the SMAC program was launched, and they still have an annual unconference in Austin every year to this day. Project-based communities, and we're doing great on time. So again, these are essentially communities that have collected or attract community members that are experts in a particular area to solve problems. Usually the incentive is monetary. In some cases, it's just sort of appealing to altruism and the greater good. But generally, there are compensation models for these. And a couple of examples here. Uvoto is a crowdsourcing platform with a global creative community of, I think now it's close to 90,000 members. And these are everyone from graphic designers to industrial designers to architects in some cases. And the projects are surprisingly varied as well. So you can see projects on the site that range from doing poster design for Greenpeace to doing actual retail environment design for retail brands. So it's this amazing range of creative output. And the other really interesting thing about Yovoto is they have a beautiful methodology for managing the innovation community, from how they present the invitation to attract the right community members to participate, to how they essentially stage the design process to get to the sort of best and final candidates for a particular solution. And the last interesting thing I'll say today, but it's a wonderful model to study, is the community members who participate in a particular challenge are also empowered to help divvy up the reward at the end of the project, which I just thought was an amazing sort of testament to the community culture that they've built, that they would be willing to empower the community, and that the community is mature and respectful enough to handle that responsibility. Another interesting example of project-based communities is CrowdSmart. And the reason I'm pointing to this one in particular is, so CrowdSmart is one of the first communities to merge essentially human expertise with algorithmic, I'll stop short of saying AI, but algorithmic expertise to essentially create what they're calling collective intelligence. This collective intelligence helps community members who are mostly investors to grade new startups. And it's a really interesting and engaged community. And again, I'll have links to everything in the final slides that I share through David. Okay, so now we get into the ideation and planning exercise. If you haven't had a chance to download the spreadsheet, again, last call. And I'll talk you through this, and I'll try to keep it to 5 minutes, because what I want to do is essentially give you an overview of the process and let you do this on your own, because we would need another hour, frankly, to actually do it together. So I want to just kind of give you the overview and walk you through how to actually do the session, and hopefully make you feel knowledgeable and empowered to go do it within your own organization. So key decisions when you're thinking about getting started with a collaborative innovation community or initiative. The first key decision is really, which business function or functions do you want to focus on? Are we talking about improving, service design for a particular product? Are we talking about, evolving a particular product? Or are we talking about a net new business model? So how big or small is this focus? And then the next step is really getting clear on your desired outcomes. So for the focal area, what do you need to have happen at the end of this initiative, right? Is it a new and enhanced product, new service description, a robust articulation of a new business model? Like what does success look like, essentially? And then the other key questions, there are many more, but this is the short list of really critical ones. What community stakeholders will you need to engage, right? So what are the roles within the community that you will need to help manage or facilitate this process to a successful conclusion? What incentives will you offer to the community participants? One very important question, how will you handle IP? So the intellectual property that's shared within the community, the ideas that are submitted, that evolve, the essentially intellectual product that is created, will it be solely owned by you, the host, or will ownership be shared? And how do you frame that up in a way that you understand it clearly and that your community who's participating understands that clearly as well? By the way, for a project-based community like Yovoto, one of the benefits of working with someone like that is they handle this part for you. What extended stakeholder support do you need? So are there additional internal participants, like maybe members of a product team or a business ops team that you need to engage? Are there external partners that you would need for your initiative? And then lastly, where will you host the community? right? Will it be brand hosted, something you're trying to stand up yourself, or will it be project based? So using someone like a Yovoto or a CrowdTap. So here's the exercise. And again, this is a worksheet that I use to facilitate much longer sessions. But this particular version of the worksheet can be done in about an hour or 50 minutes to an hour with a small group of 3 to 5 people. And so I'm going to walk through sort of each section, and then I'll pull up, stop, and we'll have some Q&A. So on side 1 of the worksheet, the column all the way to the left is really about synthesis. So this is about servicing ideas. So the questions are, what ideas about the future of online communities resonate with you? You would list them. What aspects of working with the crowd are appealing to you or inspiring to you? And then a question that sort of flips everything on its head, which is, what ideas challenge you or may have seemed absurd at first, which gets to, potentially identifying biases or blockers that you and the team might have for, for pursuing a particular line of inquiry. The middle column is disruptive threats and transformational opportunities. So spending some time talking through disruptive market trends that will affect your business and specific competitive threats that pose a risk to your business. Transformational opportunities are really about, you could even scope this to digital transformation, but what are the most interesting transformational opportunities for your business related to innovation communities, and how might innovation community help catalyze that? The column to the right is really about identifying assets and incentives. And when you think about asset, this can be something, hard and tangible, like a makerspace or a particular product, or this can be a soft asset like knowledge, experience, access to relationships, that sort of thing. So, I mean this in the broadest sense. So the intent would be to do a quick inventory of corporate assets, customer assets, partner assets, crowd assets, and anything else under other, our good catch-all category other. And then on the sort of right side of that column, thinking about what incentives each of these stakeholder groups might value, right, for their potential participation. So what might customers value as an incentive? Is it cash? Is it recognition? Is it a job? But walking through incentives for each of those stakeholder groups. Then we take all of that information from page 1 and flip the sheet over and start to essentially plot out what ideas you might want to explore. So at the on the left side of the sheet, you see the ideation canvas, of course. The column all the way to the left are stakeholders. And then the row at the bottom would be focal area, which is where you actually want to explore, essentially setting context for what this initiative might explore. So as an example, I put a new subscription product as a focal area. And so how might each of the stakeholders participate in an innovation challenge or community session? So the company, wishes to co-create a new subscription model for vacation homes. We were at a large unicorn startup that you may have heard of that does vacation rentals for this particular exercise, which probably isn't too hard to guess, which is why this example skews towards there. Customers, what might they want to get or participate in? So the company would ask them to participate in an approximately 6-week virtual design sprint, rate ideas, and vote on the final ideas. A partner, in this case, would be someone like Yovoto, who supplies the platform expertise and designs the community and manages the process. And then the crowd, which is essentially the sort of the market at large that may not be connected via community. The crowd is attracted by the partner and by the company via promos, and they are going to add to the creative ideation and the idea pool and to help essentially grade ideas and select best and final, right? So that's when you're running this exercise, the intent would be to essentially plot out, you know, at least 3, if not 4 potential directions for an innovation community pilot. And then you get to the action plan, which is looking back at the ideation canvas. What are the, you know, sort of best either ideas or components of an idea that could come together as an initiative, writing that down, listing out the key decisions, so the focal area and outcome, community type, participants, how you would handle IP, what external stakeholders would you need to engage, and how you would essentially support this via platform, and then form all of that up into a 20-second, essentially elevator pitch, which describes the objectives, the key resources, and, you know, the net effect your initiative would have in the context, ideally, of the opportunities and threats listed on page 1. And then at the end of the workshop, I encourage everyone to essentially put who they're going to share the idea with and when they're going to share it. So again, that was sort of a voiceover of how one should facilitate and fill out the worksheet. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Obviously, I run workshops to do just this and then some. So, you know, happy to discuss that as well. But, you know, hopefully that was enough of a voiceover should you want to take this back into your organization and try to run the quick exercise that we just described. And with that said, you know, we covered sort of the market context for why I think innovation communities, collaborative innovation communities are sort of ripe for a moment in the sun. We've talked about the market forces sort of pushing us there. We've talked about the opportunity. I've shown examples of project and brand-based communities, and then we've walked through the actual worksheet to frame a possible you know, possible pilot or initiative for you. There's more information about this on my blog, structure3c.com/blog. You know, there's a link to sign up for a newsletter that's published approximately monthly. And then when I share the slides, I'll have links to all the source material that I cited. And with that said, I'm going to take a break, and I think David has been curating questions.
All righty. Thanks so much, Bill. That was awesome. For those of you who are working on those worksheets, feel free to work on those. If you have questions or you get stuck on anything, we have about 12 minutes for Q&A now, so make sure to post your questions there in the Q&A section. But we have some great questions to start with, so I'll just start reading them off. First one is from David Crace. He asked if the IdeaStorm was part of the product management division or where that lived within the business.
So in my time at Dell, IdeaStorm lived within the Social Media Center of Excellence, which the intention, and this is probably another webinar in and of itself, but the intention with the SMAC team, or Social Media and Community Center of Excellence, was to concentrate sort of all the knowledge around communities and social media at Dell for a couple of years, stand up a number of initiatives around training, around normalization of platform, around activation of employees, around qualifying and quantifying, you know, how we, you know, metrics and analytics, and then pushing all of that great knowledge out into the business units. So, sorry for the long answer, but it initially lived in the central COE. I think now it lives within marketing.
It's always interesting to see where they map these innovation communities, if it's product or its own dedicated community team or marketing, which seems a little off, but.
Exactly. I mean, I think there's some benefit to having it, especially if you have multiple product teams in an organization. There's some benefit to having it in a central org just for sort of balance.
Yeah.
if you will. Like, I think, you know, if it's in a product team, I think it's easy to start ignoring it, and it will quickly atrophy as other priorities come along. You know, if it's outside of the product team, I think the concern has historically been, you know, you're just feeding us a bunch of unqualified stuff, and it really doesn't match, you know, where we're taking our roadmap, or where we want to go intellectually. And so I think the art and science of this is to really try and find, you know, friends and supporters on the product team who are interested in this type of customer collaboration, and really trying to find middle ground if the innovation community is outside of the product team.
Yeah, so that segues perfectly into our next question from Mark Finner. He asks, what do you do if product folks are not ready to receive and implement the improvement suggestions?
Okay, great question. Hey, Mark. So, you know, I think this actually rolls up into, you know, maybe more of a question around, you know, how is community generally valued at any particular company, and how is it supported throughout the organization and across different business units? You know, I would say, having been in situations where the product team is wildly enthusiastic about this, and having been in situations where you're sort of pushing it more on them, I would say there are a couple of things you can do in the case where they're not as enthusiastic, which is, you can prove to them via the quality of ideas and interactions that there's high signal conversations going on in the ideation community, and, you know, you work to convince them to participate. That puts the burden kind of on you and the community to produce high quality. And in some cases, it may prove out that for a particular product, it may not make sense to have this type of innovation community. Specific example, if you have a hardware product that has sort of 1 to 2 year lead cycles, and, you know, the ideation that's happening is just kind of out of date just because of how fast a particular market, like consumer electronics, moves, you know, you would probably be better off not to have an ideation community for that, you know, for that product.
Cool. So this next question, it's a little long-winded, so I'm going to try to condense it. It sounds like they're looking at a situation where perhaps in an open source community where people have the ability to build things on the platform, a lot of people submit ideas that aren't accepted because the core team can't work it into their roadmap. But they want to encourage the people who are suggesting those ideas or the broader community to build those features or those additions themselves. Have you seen that kind of program work? How do you motivate people to do that? Are there any tools or you know, frameworks that support that kind of model?
So it's a great question. So not knowing exactly what community this is, I'll, you know, and at risk of giving an overly general answer, you know, so I'm caveating the hell out of what I'm about to say. So at Dell, when we were rebuilding IdeaStorm, so working on IdeaStorm 2.0, we had implemented 500 of the 15,000 ideas that have been submitted. And one initiative that I was particularly passionate about but was not successful with was I wanted to license any ideas that we had passed on via like something like Creative Commons, where it's like, we're not going to do it, community, you go for it. And I think that may not be as robust an answer as the questioner is hoping for, but it may start you on an intellectual path towards, you know, maybe if, like, that sounds like a very high quality problem. There are lots of great ideas, potentially actual code that's not accepted by core. So, you know, how do you start to manage that? Well, maybe there are spin-off projects, or maybe there's the equivalent of a sort of licensing system where when the core team passes, other community members are encouraged to, you know, form up and take the ideas and the code into, you know, possibly another direction. But that, you know, ultimately that's what I had hoped for with IdeaStorm was there were a lot of great ideas. There still are a lot of great ideas on IdeaStorm that Dell just isn't in a position to act on. And so my hope was that they would essentially open a portfolio of those ideas for use via something like Creative Commons licensing.
Awesome. We're at 5 minutes left here, so time for one, maybe two more.
Cool.
Kate asked if you have any examples of how clients have answered your synthesis questions and how that guided your solution. So maybe a little guidance on that worksheet.
On the synthesis question, so yeah, like what ideas about the future of online communities resonate with you? So for me, like if I were answering this, you know, ideas would be, you know, evolving from experiences that are, you know, spurred by gamification or reputation into maybe something like a purpose framework, right? Where you're actually understanding someone's path and career and giving them, you know, feedback, awards, accomplishments that are actually helpful to them versus, you know, meaningless icons. Other ideas would be evolving from destination communities to community ecosystems or federated communities where multiple brands partner on a topical community. For the question around, you know, what aspects of working with the crowd, you know, how might I answer that? You know, what might be inspiring? You know, if I were at Autodesk, one idea might be, I'd love to, you know, have representatives from every makerspace in the country come together around an initiative to see what opportunities there were for standing up makerspaces in sub-Saharan Africa and what the differences might be, what, you know, local financial impact or social good impact there might be for doing something like that. And what ideas challenge you or may have seemed absurd at first? You know, maybe like what, ultimately, if Facebook is serious about communities, like what is a reasonable strategy? Because I've been not very fond of Facebook's community strategy for a while, but it seems like they're serious about it and they're investing in actually trying to produce quality experiences. So I would have considered that absurd at first. But, you know, if I were to think about it and be objective, you know, ultimately, if my community strategy included some sort of outpost or engagement on Facebook, what might that look like? That would be an example of an idea that, you know, personally would challenge me or I would have thought was absurd, but on a second objective look, would reconsider. So I hope those examples were helpful.
Kate responded and said they were all very helpful examples, so good work.
Awesome.
Cool. We're right about at time here, so I'll cut us off here so everyone can get back to work right on time, get everyone back to their days. But Bill, thank you so much for taking the time today. Incredibly generous. This is all super helpful. I hope it helped everyone here map out your innovation community strategies and start to ideate what you can do for your own communities. Again, we're going to follow up with an email with Bill's information. We'll share the slides, and you'll also be getting the recorded video here. And you already should have the worksheets, so you can print those out and use them time and time again. Bill, is there anywhere else aside from here that people can follow up with you or check in, follow your work?
Just the blog, which the link is showing now. And if you have specific questions about anything I covered today, happy to do my best to respond to emails. If you would just drop me an email at bill@structure3c.com. But David, I really appreciate the opportunity to sort of present this particular subject to the CMX community. So thank you very much, and I've really enjoyed the conversation today.
Likewise. Thanks again. I'll see you soon, Bill. Thanks to everybody who joined. We'll see you at the next webinar or event or wherever else we all get together again. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, folks.